And something with Hour of the Bees, that one, the protagonist is a 12-year-old Mexican American girl,
Yes,
which, as we've been talking, I have carefully deduced that you are not 12 years old.
I am not 12 years old. That's
And that you
correct.
do not appear to be a Mexican American
I am
either.
not. No.
So how do you write about someone whose experience is so much different than your own? Part of me hates asking that question because you're an author. Of course, you're writing about somebody whose experience is different than your own, or
Sure.
we don't have a story. But
Sure.
when you're writing about somebody from a completely different background than your own, how do you make sure that you're honoring that background and representing that culture? And then also, how do you negotiate with publishers that though you don't have that background, you're going to be the a person who wrote a book about someone with that background?
Yes, I have thoughts. I have so many thoughts. And I'm so glad that you asked this question because I actually think it's really important. But I really need to take a drink. So let me take a drink while I gather my thoughts. Okay. Up top, this is probably an unfair disclosure, but I just want to be like totally honest. If I were writing Hour of the Bees today, I would not write a Mexican American character. I wrote that in 2013. I had very different thoughts and opinions and feelings about what I personally could and should be doing as a writer. My where I'm at now personally is and again, this is personal. I'm not trying to like set out a mandate. I just want to say where I'm coming from so that other writers can maybe hear it and be like, oh, that's something that I could consider too, or that's something to think about. Until there are a decent amount of writers of color as a white author, I feel right now, like personally, I will just be writing white protagonists until we have as many authors of color as there are characters of color, until the canon of authors of color is a little more fleshed out. That's where I feel that's what I'm going to do. And I will say my next book that comes out next year is a YA that was also originally about a Mexican American family. And in revisions, the biggest thing that I changed in revisions was changed the characters to be white rather than Mexican American, even though I had done all the research. I had written the book many times over. So that's partly why that book is taking so long to come out. It was supposed to be out in 2019 because I had this reckoning where I just realized like, oh, whatever I thought I was doing by writing a character of color, it's not actually how I want to be supporting authors of color. So I have changed my tune a little since I wrote Hour of the Bees. And I've had conversations with my editor too, where she said, I probably wouldn't acquire Hour of the Bees now because of your background and the character's background. I just have different thoughts about that. So it's okay.
Knowing that the book did go on to be a success.
Yeah, I mean, that's just, and again, that's after a lot of, I'm not going to pretend like it was easy to like come to that conclusion or to make those changes for my upcoming book. And there were a lot of really painful conversations and reflections that I did with my editor, with my agent, with my writer friends, on my own. And so just it's okay to change. It's okay to change your mind. It's good to shift and pay attention to what's happening in publishing and listen to lots of voices. And it's also okay if you are a white writer who is going to continue to write protagonists of color. I'm not saying we should all stop this. I'm just letting people know where I'm coming from. At the time, writing Hour of the Bees, this was around the time when the We Need Diverse Books movement was really taking off and was all over Twitter. And it was definitely something I was paying attention to and was very, I don't know, I have a lot of I have a lot of questions for myself that are still unanswered. Like, what were you hoping to do? Did you think that you were helping by writing a character of color? Because I know that there are some people who I think there's some writers who feel like they're offering some gift, or that they're being helpful to this inclusion movement by writing characters of color. Excuse me. And I know that that wasn't my intention, because I don't write with the aim to help anyone at all. So I wasn't thinking that I was being so benevolent by writing a character of color. Like, that wasn't my intention. I live in Utah, which is a very, very white state, but there's tons of diversity here, plenty of it. And I don't know. Again, I don't think I'm answering your question. So I did a lot of reading. I read a ton of magical realism, specifically because I knew that that was the sort of tone and like tradition that I wanted to draw on. Again, I would not make that choice today. I read a lot of forums about what it was like to be Mexican American, rather than reading upfront articles or like nonfiction books. And this was 2012, 2013, when it was a little safer to be like trolling forums for information like this. I read a lot of blogs. And then I had a lot of, you can call them sensitivity readers or authenticity readers or whatever you want to call them. I had a lot of Latinx readers read through the manuscript and point out anything that was racist. And there were plenty of little things that were in there that I hadn't realized were racist that were pulled out. And then Candlewick hired their own authenticity reader. And again, I feel good about the work that I did. I feel I'm not embarrassed by Hour of the Bees at all. I feel like I feel really proud of the representation that I created. Not representation, the depiction that I created of somebody with a very different background that I have. But I would just do it differently today. Does that answer your question?
Oh, and then some.
Okay, sorry, that was a big.
You're being so very open.
That was a big can of worms. Well, I just have, I don't know. I feel Hour of the Bees was a huge success, and it feels on one hand like, well, it would be really easy for me to just talk about, I don't know, to not share my reflections on its success and on its creation since then. Because I've grown.
It's your baby, though, right? You still look back. That's your debut novel. You still.
I love that book.
Fond of it.
Love that book. So proud of it. Wouldn't change a thing. Like, just so proud. So proud. And this doesn't. It doesn't exonerate me. That's not why I'm saying the following thing. But I've heard very positive things and very positive feedback about what I wrote. And so that probably helps me feel a little better about it. I think it would be different if I had a lot of people in my inbox telling me this was problematic, but that's ultimately kind of what I the conclusion I came to when I was making the decision about my next book, was that the representation and the depiction and the good job that you can do actually is irrelevant to me. It's more about, well, but who's writing it and who's being paid to write it. And that has very little to do with like whether or not your depiction is problematic or not. Like that's where I finally came. That's where I landed, was like, oh, I can be defensive about, but I'll do such a good job, and I'll make sure it's not racist, and I'll make sure I have all of these readers who give me the thumbs up, and I'll scour every word. But ultimately, if I go beyond just the book and just look at myself, where I'm coming from, my background and publishing, and look at the numbers and look and see like, okay, who else is here writing books? Is it still mostly white people? Okay, then and this was hard. It was a really hard conclusion for me to come to. I did not like the idea of only writing white protagonists, because that's not the world I live in. That's not the world I like to think that I see around me. You know, it just felt very like, oh, really? But like, the world is full of so many amazing people, and it felt very limiting. But but if I combine writing white protagonists as a white author, and I'm saying white protagonists, I'm not saying all white characters, because there's plenty of room in every book to write characters of color, but it's very different to write the character who's the lens for your book as a character of color. That's very different. I don't remember where my sentence was going. Anyway, it's combining that with also buying books that are written by authors of color, making sure that when I'm on a panel, there's authors of color and it's not just all white people. Like those are things that I can do as somebody who's in this industry, just to make sure that, like, okay, is this a nice inclusive shelf of like publishing? Are we all here? Are we all represented? So again, sorry, I just unloaded a whole big, huge,
amazing bit of content that
can't